Hi, and welcome back to the Wandering Wesleyan. This is Chaplain Greg, and good to have you here. If you are liking these videos, please like and subscribe, and I will continue to put out more of this content and talk about biblical subjects from a Wesleyan perspective. And we are continuing our Stories of the Rabbi series, and this is our 50th episode. So thank you everybody who has subscribed to this channel and made it possible to get 50 episodes of this out. That's not including the shorts, the little shorts that I put out, but the 50 of the videos. So thank you. Thank you so much for liking and subscribing. We are continuing with the Gospel of Mark, and we're going to be going to Mark chapter 2 and starting at verse 13. And so Jesus has gathered 4 followers. And these 4 followers are fishermen, and he's done a bunch of miracles, and he's done a whole bunch of stuff. And Mark is compacting a lot of information into a short amount of space. And he's going to call a 5th follower now. And so if you look at chapter 13, Mark sets the scene with Jesus went out again by the sea. The whole crowd was coming to him, and he was teaching them. So this is a typical transition sentence that Mark will use, showing that we're going to be doing something different now. Verse 14, then passing by, he saw Levi, the son of Alphaeus, sitting at a tax office. And he said to him, follow me. And he got up and he followed him. So that's Levi got up and followed Jesus. So Levi, we don't hear the name Levi that often. That would be Matthew's Hebrew name, coming probably from the tribe of Levi. He would be named Levi, and so his Greek name would be Matthew or Matthias. Notice that Mark is name dropping again with Alphaeus. So Levi, the son of Alphaeus. It's a simple command that he gives them: follow me. It's the same that he gave to Simon, Andrew, James, and John. So what's interesting, though, is that Levi is sitting at a tax office. So tax collectors were an interesting group of people. They worked for Rome, so they were kind of seen as traitors. They were traitors to the Jewish nation. They were seen as working for the enemy. So they work for Rome, sort of think of like a customs agent, that he would be sitting there in Galilee and he would be taking in the customs for goods and services coming and going through the region. Some tax collectors were quite honest. Others were not. Zacchaeus, in another Bible story, was probably not an honest tax collector, because when he met Jesus and started to follow Jesus, he had to make reprimands for the dishonest gains that he had made. We don't know if Levi was honest or dishonest. All we know that he was a Jew. He was a tax collector. He worked for Rome and ostracized, therefore, by the Jewish community. Tax collectors were seen as conspirators with Rome and unclean by definition. So Levi gives up this very lucrative position, and he follows Jesus. Now there's probably more to it than that, but Mark is giving the gist of the story. Jesus said, come. Levi said, sure. So we're going to go on to verse 15 and 16. While he, meaning Jesus, was reclining at the table of Levi, many tax collectors and sinners were eating with Jesus and his disciples, for there were many who were following him. Okay, so this is important because those outside the religious community are surrounding Jesus. He's reclining at the table. This is usually how they ate. They would lay on their left side and use their right hand to eat and to dip the bread into different things. Eating a meal with someone was seen as a very intimate act in the ancient world. It still is today. When you have dinner with somebody, it's an act of fellowship. It's an act of getting to know somebody. Notice many were following him. So Jesus is reaching out to communities that are ostracized by the religious people. They're ostracized by those that would call themselves religious and followers of God. And they're following Jesus because Jesus is intentionally reaching out to them. And the scribes ask why a teacher with authority would associate with such unclean people. Oh my. So this is rankling the ire of the religious elite. And Jesus gives him a pretty solid answer. So when we go to verse 17, we get that answer. When Jesus heard this, they wouldn't talk to him directly, would they? They would just mumble amongst themselves. But Jesus heard it. And he said to them, "It is not those who are well who need a doctor, but those who are sick. I didn't come to call the righteous, but to call sinners." So Jesus is now using a metaphor of doctors, and he emphatically states that he's calling those lost in sin to be found. I didn't come to call the righteous. Do you hear that sarcasm in his voice? He's got a lot of sarcasm because here's the little hidden secret. We're all sinners. Even the most religious person is still a sinner and in need of Jesus. And if the religious elite who were there would realize that they need Jesus just as much as the prostitutes and the tax collectors and the other people that were surrounding him, they might have been able to see the joy that comes from receiving the Savior. Calling of Matthew is different from the other four in that, yes, the other four were sort of blue-collar ruffian workers, but here we have somebody who is truly on the outside of the religious system being called to follow Jesus. Jesus is bucking the religious system at every chance he can get. So let's move on to the next section here, and we're going to have some questions about fasting. All right, so we're going to be looking at Mark chapter 2, verses 18 through, let's say, 22. So let's start with verse 18. Now John's disciples and the Pharisees were fasting. People came and asked him, "Why do John's disciples and the Pharisees' disciples fast, but your disciples do not fast?" So here's another question coming from the Pharisees. All right, so Jesus is there. Pharisees, some people, we don't know who some people is, but some people come to Jesus, and it doesn't seem to be one of these kind of challenges that are trying to trick Jesus up. It seems to be a pretty genuine question that they're asking here. Notice that the question concerns Jesus' followers. Now this is important because the followers of a rabbi were supposed to reflect who the rabbi actually is. So by asking this question, they're not only asking about the followers, but they're asking about the nature of Jesus and his ministry. Now, this whole idea of fasting is important in the ancient Jewish culture, and it's important in the Orthodox Jewish culture today, as well as in many Christian cultures. It's a spiritual discipline, and if you've ever read Richard Foster's The Celebration of Discipline, or maybe Dallas Willard's work on the disciplines, you'll know that fasting is a really important discipline that the Christian church has been engaging in for many, many years. But for the Jewish person, fasting has several different reasons. There's several different reasons to fast. So if you go to Leviticus 16, 29, and 31, you'll see you fast during the Feast of Atonement. It's one of 5 post-exilic, meaning post-exile, after the Jews returned from Babylon and from Persia. One of the 5 post-exilic facts. So you can find these listed in Zechariah 7:5, chapter 8, verse 19, and also Esther chapter 9, verse 31, and that's the fast of Purim. Purim is an important time. Jewish people would also fast during periods of mourning. If they need a petition for aid from God as an act of repentance, as an act of piety, for pursuit of wisdom, forgiveness of unknown sins. The Pharisees actually engaged in fasting twice a week, and that would be on Mondays and Thursdays. They very publicly fasted. Everybody knew when the Pharisees were fasting. But here's the thing. Fasting must be done with a repentant heart. It's not to be done for show. So when we go to verses 19 through 22, we have a typical answer from Jesus, a typical rabbinic answer, because if you're a rabbi, you usually don't answer questions directly. You answer with a parable, with a story, or with another question. So Jesus is not going to give a direct answer, but he gives three analogies. So let's read 19 through 22. Jesus said to them, "The wedding guests cannot fast while the groom is with them, can they? As long as they have the groom with them, they cannot fast. But the time will come when the groom will be taken away from them, and they will fast on that day." All right, so here's our first analogy, the groom. So the bridegroom. How can somebody fast during a time of celebration? So like during Advent, how many Christmas parties, and I'm recording this in December, Advent time. I mean, how many Christmas parties and potlucks am I going to? Because this is a time for celebration. It's not a time for fasting. Easter Day is not a time for fasting. Lent is a time for fasting. But Easter Day is a time of celebration. So one doesn't celebrate during a wedding. One doesn't fast during a wedding celebration. It's a time for celebration. Here, people should be joyous, not sorrowful, because Jesus is with them. And there was a rabbinic rule during that time. And this is fascinating because this would apply directly to the Pharisees. There was a rabbinic rule stating that any sort of fasting activity must stop during weddings. So if a Pharisee was engaged in a fast for whatever reason, they were invited when they would go to a wedding, then they would need to stop their fasting, and they were forced to go and have a good time. I mean, that's really what they were supposed to do. So Jesus is using this analogy of a wedding to tell them, the bridegroom is here. You should be rejoicing. You should be celebrating the fact that he is here. Now, Jesus is going to go on and use two other analogies here. And this is going to be taken up in verse 21 with the next one. No one sews a patch of unshrunk cloth on a garment. Otherwise, the new patch pulls away from the old cloth and the worse tear is made. All right, an unshrunk patch. So if we have lots of clothes, all right, in our Western culture. If you live in a third world country, and I have a lot of subscribers from South Africa, so maybe you don't have as much clothes as we do. But, you know, back in the ancient Israel days, they basically had one or two sets of clothing. So if one tore, you put a piece of cloth on that. Now, if it was an unshrunk piece of cloth, it would tear away from where you would sew it in as it did shrink, as you did wash it over and over and over and over again. So you wouldn't put a new piece of fabric on an old set of clothes to cover up a tear or a patch. It's the old way of relating to God, and it cannot be the same anymore now that the Messiah has arrived. The old way of relating to God cannot be the same as the new way we are going to relate to God. That's what he's saying through this shrunken patch. You need to worship God in a new way. You need to put shrunken cloth on an old garment. It just doesn't. Unshrunken cloths don't work on old garments. You can put unshrunken cloths on new garments, but not on old. So he goes to talk about wineskins, and no one puts new wine into old wineskins. Otherwise, the wine would burst the skins, and the wine is lost as well as the skins. No, new wine is put into fresh wineskins. Well, what is he talking about here? Well, it's the same concept as the unshrunk cloth. You wouldn't put unshrunk cloth on old clothes, you'd put it on new clothes. You wouldn't put new wine into an old wineskin, because if you put new wine into an old wineskin, remember, they didn't have refrigeration back then. All right, so there was no grape juice. Some people say Jesus didn't drink wine, he drank grape juice. Well, you can't have grape juice back then because there was no refrigeration, and grape juice very quickly turns into alcohol, into wine. And so when you put fresher wine into an old wineskin that's already expanded, has already gone beyond where it's at, that wine will continue to fermentate and continue to become more alcoholic and release gas, and will eventually burst the skin. No, you would have a brand new wineskin that hasn't been expanded, that has a lot of elasticity to go, and you would put it in there, and as the wine continued to ferment and expand, the wineskin would be able to hold it. Okay, so it's the same thing. You don't put a new thing into an old thing, you put a new thing into a new thing. Jesus is the new thing. He's here to be celebrated. He's here to have joy, and he is brand new. He's not the old way of doing things. And the scene is him being surrounded by a whole bunch of people that have been ostracized by the religious elite. And this is the new way. It's not the old way. So that's where we're going to leave it for today. Thank you for watching. If you like this, please subscribe and hit that like button on YouTube. And so next week will be our 51st episode. Thank you for 50 episodes. This is Chaplain Greg, your wandering Wesleyan. I'll see you next week. God bless.